Hello, everyone. Today, let's take a walk with me around the beautiful Central Park, a massive public urban park, the Green Lung, located right in the middle of Manhattan, New York. It provides a space for relaxation, recreation, and natural scenery for millions of visitors and local residents every year. As we walk together today, I'll introduce you to one of the most famous and moving contemporary romance novels of all time, The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. The Fault in Our Stars doesn't shy away from difficult topics. It explores pain, loss, and death in a direct yet subtle way. However, what makes this book so captivating is the way it shows the beauty of life. John Green shows us that even in the most tragic moments, there is still room for hope, love, and small joys. This is a story about finding forever in a short while. Join me as we explore this tear-jerking yet incredibly inspiring story. I will divide this story into 3 chapters. Chapter 1: A Fateful Meeting in a Place of Sorrow. The world of Hazel Grace Lancaster, a 16-year-old girl with sorrowful eyes and short hair, had shrunk to the invisible boundaries of her thyroid cancer that had metastasized to her lungs. Her life was a carefully orchestrated routine of clinic visits, doctor appointments, and above all, the constant presence of her oxygen tank and nasal cannula, an indispensable companion, a constant reminder of her own fragility. She carried with her the exhaustion and pessimism of someone who had accepted their fate. Hazel no longer believed in miracles or fairy tales. She felt she was like a grenade waiting to detonate, and when it did, it would inflict unbearable pain on everyone she loved. For that reason, Hazel tried to keep a distance from the world, isolating herself to avoid hurting those who would have to watch her go. Her parents, who had dedicated their lives to caring for her, were always worried about her daughter's isolation. They convinced Hazel to join a cancer support group, hoping she could find a sense of community and a little light in her life. Hazel reluctantly agreed. The group met in the basement of a church, sarcastically named the Literal Heart of Jesus. For Hazel, it was a space filled with tragedy and a constant repetition of stories. She was familiar with the faces. Patrick, the group leader, a testicular cancer survivor who always spoke about the importance of Jesus, and friends like Isaac, a boy who was about to have surgery to remove his remaining eye. They sat together in a circle, sharing their pain and fears, a ritual that was both sad and monotonous. Then, on one fateful Wednesday afternoon, an event broke that monotony. A tall, charming young man walked into the room. It was Augustus Gus Waters, a 17-year-old who had a prosthetic leg due to bone cancer. But that did not diminish his confidence. His eyes were bright, and he looked at Hazel with a directness and lack of pity she had never experienced. Gus wasn't just a bone cancer survivor. He was a self-proclaimed philosopher, a metaphorical person, who always looked for deeper meaning in everything. Gus had a peculiar habit of placing a cigarette between his lips, but never lighting it. He said, "It's a metaphor. You put the killing thing right between your teeth, but you don't give it the power to kill you." This action immediately captivated Hazel, a person who lived only by breathing pure oxygen. After the meeting, Gus approached Hazel. He didn't say cliché things or ask mundane questions. He simply invited Hazel to his house to watch the movie V for Vendetta. Hazel hesitated, but was strangely drawn in by his charm and openness. She agreed. It was the beginning of a relationship unlike any other. At Gus's house, they talked non-stop. They discussed everything from movies to literature, and most of all, their deepest fears and hopes. There, Gus introduced Hazel to his greatest obsession, a fictional novel called An Imperial Affliction by the reclusive author Peter van Houten, who lived in Amsterdam. The book was about a girl named Anna who also had cancer, and it had an abrupt, open ending that haunted them both. Gus and Hazel spent hours discussing the book. To them, the book was more than just a story. It was a mirror reflecting their own lives. They longed to know the fate of the characters because they were terrified that their own lives would end just as abruptly and meaninglessly, without a proper conclusion. They wanted to know what would happen to their loved ones after they were gone, and whether their stories would be continued by anyone. The book became the bridge for their love. They exchanged messages, talked on the phone, and spent long afternoons analyzing every word. Gus, with his fear of oblivion, yearned to leave his mark on the world, to make his life mean something. In contrast, Hazel just wanted to be a grenade that misfired, to disappear quietly so as not to hurt anyone. This difference did not drive them apart. It bound them together, because they understood each other's deepest fears. Their relationship developed quickly, like a flame igniting between two people who knew their time was limited. They loved each other with a love that was not just of teenagers, but of people who had to face a harsh reality. Their meeting at the literal heart of Jesus was not a coincidence, but a destiny, a precious gift that life had given them so they could live every moment to the fullest. Finally, the book and their shared obsession led to a bold decision. Gus decided to use his wish from a charity foundation, not for himself, but for Hazel. He proposed to take Hazel and her mother to Amsterdam to find Peter Van Houten and the answers to their life's biggest questions. This trip was not just a romantic adventure, but a pilgrimage to seek peace and meaning in a world full of pain. Everything was ready for the journey. Part 2. The Amsterdam Trip and a Devastating Truth. A journey to a land of dreams. After Gus, with his generosity and sincere love, decided to use his wish from a charity foundation to take Hazel to Amsterdam, a new wind swept into their lives. For Hazel, this was more than just a trip. It was a temporary escape from a brutal reality. For the first time, she could momentarily forget her illness and live like a normal person. The flight to Amsterdam became a symbol of freedom. Gus and Hazel crossed thousands of miles together, carrying within them the hope of finding answers to life's biggest questions. Amsterdam appeared before their eyes like a living painting, with its shimmering canals, graceful little bridges, and colorful crooked houses. They walked together and talked endlessly. Every moment there was cherished, like precious grains of sand slipping through the hourglass of their lives. They experienced a kind of love that had no barriers, a love that illness could not stop. However, one place in particular became a symbol of this trip: the Anne Frank house. As Hazel entered the house, with her heavy oxygen tank, she struggled with the narrow and steep staircases. Gus was always there, patient and strong, helping her every step of the way. In the cramped, haunting space of the house, they listened to the stories of Anne Frank's fear and hope. Amidst thousands of tourists, amidst the pain of the past and the life of the present, Gus and Hazel shared their first kiss. The kiss was not just the beginning of a romantic love, but a moment of life and love, blossoming in a space that had once been a hiding place from death. It was a miraculous moment, when their love was stronger than even tragedy. The truth behind the literary hero. After that romantic moment, the main goal of their trip had arrived: the meeting with Peter Van Houten, the author of An Imperial Affliction. Hazel and Gus had built an idealized image of him, a reclusive genius, a sage who could grant them wisdom and answers. They expected him to be the person who would help them understand the meaning of life and death. But reality was much more brutal. When they arrived at his house, they did not find a genius, but a rude, alcoholic, and bitter man. Van Houten mocked their illnesses, dismissed their questions, and refused to talk about the characters in his book. He was simply a coward, afraid of his own success and drowning in his own sorrow. He destroyed the image of the hero they had built for so long. This experience was a major shock to both of them. They realized that the answers they were looking for would not come from a book or an author. They would come from their own story. Love, life, and meaning were not found on the pages of a book, but in the very moments they shared together. This disappointing meeting taught them a profound lesson. Their story, whether it had an ending or not, was more important than any work of literature. A sudden twist and the beginning of the end. After that romantic moment, the main goal of their trip had arrived. The meeting with Peter Van Houten, the author of An Imperial Affliction. Hazel and Gus had built an idealized image of him, a reclusive genius, a sage who could grant them wisdom and answers. They expected him to be the person who would help them understand the meaning of life and death. But reality was much more brutal. When they arrived at his house, they did not find a genius, but a rude, alcoholic, and bitter man. Van Houten mocked their illnesses, dismissed their questions, and refused to talk about the characters in his book. He was simply a coward, afraid of his own success and drowning in his own sorrow. He destroyed the image of the hero they had built for so long. This experience was a major shock to both of them. They realized that the answers they were looking for would not come from a book or an author. They would come from their own story. Love, life, and meaning were not found on the pages of a book, but in the very moments they shared together. This disappointing meeting taught them a profound lesson. Their story, whether it had an ending or not, was more important than any work of literature. A sudden twist and the beginning of the end. After leaving Van Houten's house, Hazel and Gus walked in silence, lost in thought. They had one last romantic dinner at one of Amsterdam's finest restaurants. There, Gus looked at Hazel with eyes full of love and admiration. He told her that he loved her, and that he felt lucky to have her in his life. Hazel returned his affection. They went back to the hotel, where they shared a moment of intimacy. That romance only made the tragedy to come even more heartbreaking. After that night, on their way back, Gus revealed a devastating truth. While Hazel was still struggling with her illness, Gus had to secretly undergo an emergency surgery and learned that his cancer had returned. It hadn't just returned, it had metastasized throughout his body and was now terminal. This shock changed everything completely. Hazel, who had accepted her own death, now had to face the loss of the person she loved most. Their roles had been cruelly reversed. Gus, who had always been full of hope and optimism, now had to face his greatest fear, the fear of oblivion. And Hazel, who had always carried the anxiety of death, now became the one who had to support and care for Gus. The trip back from Amsterdam was no longer an escape, but a journey back to reality. Everything had changed. The fear they had once faced had now become a reality, but with a cruel twist. It had not happened to Hazel, but to Gus. The dreamlike trip had ended, and a new battle had begun. A battle that they both knew they could not win. Part 3: The Death and a Final Message. A brutal journey and impending fear. After the fateful trip to Amsterdam, Hazel and Gus's lives were completely changed. The pessimism that was once Hazel's now belonged to Gus, who had to face a brutal reality. His cancer had returned and was now incurable. The promise of a life of infinity had been replaced by a final journey filled with pain and decline. Gus's once charming confidence and swagger gradually disappeared, giving way to physical weakness and mental despair. He became obsessed with his greatest fear, the fear of oblivion. He yearned to leave a mark, a legacy, but now, even holding on to his spirit had become an overwhelming challenge. There was one particularly heartbreaking moment that showed the brutality of the disease. One evening, Gus tried to go out to buy cigarettes, but he failed miserably. He choked and had to be rushed to the hospital. In his agony and desperation, he realized his own powerlessness. Hazel was by his side, witnessing the collapse of a person she had once admired for his resilience and optimism. In that moment, Hazel realized that her love for Gus was not just romantic love, but the love of a life partner, someone who would be by his side until his very last moment. The pre-funeral and a final prayer. Before his illness took all his strength, Gus made one final request. He organized a pre-funeral at the church, where he wanted Hazel and his best friend Isaac to read their eulogies for him while he was still alive. This was a powerful and moving act, a final attempt to face death on his own terms. The ceremony was not a sad event, but a moment of truth and love. Isaac, Gus's friend who had lost both his eyes, read his eulogy with a bitter humor. He spoke about their friendship and how Gus had taught him to see the world with his soul. When it was Hazel's turn, she read a eulogy not about death, but about life. She spoke about their love and how Gus had changed her life. She called him a great man and said she would never trade the short time she had with him for a longer life without him. With her words, Hazel gave Gus what he had yearned for most. She affirmed that his life had meaning, that he would never be forgotten. It was a moment of acceptance and unconditional love, a moment that soothed Gus's greatest fear. The death and the pain of loss. After that emotional ceremony, Gus's health deteriorated rapidly. He was hospitalized and spent his final days in pain. Hazel never left his side. She was there, reading books, telling stories, and simply holding his hand. Their love had overcome all barriers, and in those final moments, they were no longer just patients, but simply two people in love. Gus passed away quietly. Death did not come in a dramatic moment, but arrived peacefully, leaving a huge void in Hazel's heart. She was plunged into a state of immense pain and loneliness. Everything returned to normal, but now the world was missing a brilliant light. The pain of loss forced Hazel to face a harsh reality. She had to learn how to live without Gus, how to continue her story without him by her side. A final message and eternal meaning. In the following days, Hazel found unexpected comfort from Peter Van Houten, who appeared at Gus's funeral. He explained that Gus had contacted him before he died, asking him to write a eulogy for Hazel. And then Hazel received a final letter from Gus. It was a moving and sincere letter, a final farewell that Gus had written for her. In the letter, Gus wrote about his fear of oblivion, but he also said that he had found the meaning of his life through Hazel's love. He wrote that he had no regrets and that he would never trade the short time with her for a longer life without him. He wrote, "Some infinities are bigger than other infinities." This sentence summarized the entire message of the book. Their love, though short, had an infinite meaning. The story ends with Hazel reading Gus's letter. She found peace and acceptance in her grief. The book is not a story about winning the battle against cancer, but a celebration of finding meaning, love, and beauty in an imperfect world. It shows us that even when our story doesn't have a happy ending, the love and memories we create will last forever. The story ends here. It is a beautiful story, isn't it? Thank you for walking and listening to the story with me today. I'll see you in our next New York adventures, along with even more fascinating stories. Goodbye for now.